I never imagined my own son's voice could make my hands tremble. But that afternoon, standing in my Milwaukee kitchen with the smell of coffee and lemon cleaner lingering in the air, I heard it. Steady, polite, distant. "Mom," he said, "Caroline and I wanted to talk about the wedding. My name is Helen Porter. I'm 68, retired, and I've never once been late paying a bill or forgotten a birthday." I thought that counted for something, but as David kept talking, I realized the truth. I had spent my life showing up for people who no longer showed up for me. He cleared his throat the way he always does when he's trying to sound composed. "It's going to be a small, classy ceremony. Caroline's just trying to keep things simple." A faint hum of his fiance's voice drifted through the phone, followed by his sigh. "She thinks it might be better if you didn't come." For a second, the sentence didn't make sense. I actually glanced around my kitchen as if he might be talking to someone else. The refrigerator buzzed. The clock ticked. A dog barked outside. Everything stayed exactly the same while something inside me quietly split apart. "She doesn't want me there," I asked barely above a whisper. "It's not personal." He rushed in, his tone practiced. "Caroline just thinks you get one emotional sometimes and she really wants the day to be dreamy. You know how she is about perfection. Emotional, drama-free, perfection." Each word fell softly, but the ripples they left were endless. I steadied myself against the counter, staring at the faded magnet on the fridge. The one with his kindergarten photo, his crooked grin, his wild hair. I took that picture after a diner shift, still wearing my uniform, kneeling in the yard so he could hug me with sticky syrup hands. "Do you think that too, David?" I asked that I'd ruin it. He hesitated. "Mom, I just don't want tension. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder than it has to be. I swallowed an ache rising in my throat. Another whisper from Caroline, light, impatient, drifted through the receiver. And then my son, the same boy who once picked dandelions for me on Mother's Day, delivered the final blow. "She just wants a certain kind of vibe. It's very elegant, and she's worried it might be too much having you there." Too much. I stared at the phone like it had burned my palm. I wanted to remind him of the nights I'd stayed up mending his prom suit, because we couldn't afford a new one. Of the double shifts that paid for his textbooks. Of the gas money I left in his glove compartment so he wouldn't have to ask. But I didn't. I exhaled slowly and said the only thing that felt possible. "I understand." He sounded relieved. "Thanks, Mom. We'll celebrate another time." "Okay. Just you and me." Celebrate. The word felt hollow. I pictured them on the other end, her perfect nails tapping his hand over hers, pleased with how gently they'd handled me, as if I were a problem to be managed. My fingers went cold. A single snowflake drifted past the window, landed on the sill, and melted away. That's me, I thought, melting without a sound. When I hung up, the silence inside the house thickened. I could hear everything. The heater humming, the floorboards settling, the wind brushing against the glass. My eyes moved across the kitchen, the old wooden table, the stack of clipped coupons, the chipped mug with Best Mo painted in crooked letters. He made it when he was 6. I'd kept it long after the paint began to fade. I remembered how proud I was when he told me he'd proposed. I bought a navy dress with tiny white flowers, modest, pretty. I'd even started saving for a gift, something meaningful, like a framed photo of his father and me on our wedding day. Robert would have liked Caroline. He always looked for the good in people. I tried. I really did. But standing there with the phone still warm in my hand, I couldn't find the good. Only the emptiness that settles in when someone you love forgets who you are. I wanted to scream to tell him he was breaking my heart, but nothing came out. Years of swallowing hurt had made silence my default. I could hear my pulse slow and steady as if my body understood what my mind didn't yet. That everything had just shifted. I walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and let cold water run over my fingers until they stung. Outside, the wind picked up, tossing dry leaves across the yard. My reflection wavered in the window. Older, smaller, but still standing. Too dramatic, I whispered. Too much. For who? For the woman who worked doubles to pay his tuition? For the mother who skipped dinner so he could have enough for prom? For someone who never asked for anything in return? Only the refrigerator hummed back. I dried my hands, set the phone on the counter, and stared at the call log. His name glowing at the top like a headline announcing what I already knew. My son was getting married, and I wasn't invited. I stood there until the cold seeped through the floorboards. I wasn't angry yet. Anger takes energy, and all I felt was a quiet folding inward, a collapse into numbness. And then beneath it all, something unfamiliar stirred. A faint pulse of clarity. Not loud or explosive, just a thin thread of light beneath a locked door. If they wanted distance, I could give it to them. I glanced at the drawer where my checkbook and old bank statement sat. My fingers twitched, then stilled. Not yet. Outside, snow was falling harder, smoothing the sidewalk, erasing footprints, blanketing the world in clean, indifferent white. I didn't know it then, but everything had already pivoted. That was the moment I stopped pleading to be included. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and watched the flakes blur past the window. The clock ticked, slow and patient, and somewhere inside, beneath the ache and disbelief, something new took shape. Not revenge, not yet, but something sharper. Understanding. I used to believe that love meant doing everything for the people you cared about, no matter thickest. I thought that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, they would see my heart. But after that call from David, the truth began to surface. All the moments when I should have realized how quickly people grow accustomed to someone who never says no. When Robert died, the world didn't pause. I remember standing in our small living room, staring at the same clock that had ticked through every dinner, every argument, every bedtime story, still ticking as if nothing had changed. He was only 49. I was 45 with 2 kids and a mortgage I could barely breathe under. The insurance company sent a letter 3 weeks later, polite and cold, saying there had been a processing error. The payout was barely half of what we were promised. I sat at the kitchen table until the numbers blurred. That night, I decided I would take any job I could find. The diner off Highway 41 hired me for the morning shift. The place always smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease. No matter how many times I scrubbed my hands, the scent followed me home. After that shift, I cleaned offices downtown. The first few nights, I was so exhausted, I could hardly untie my shoes. But no one else was going to do it. The kids needed me, and Bills didn't care that I was grieving. David was 15 then, loud, confident, always moving. After Robert died, all that noise vanished. He grew quiet, too quiet, watching me like I might shatter. I tried to hide my exhaustion so he wouldn't worry, smiling through dinners and pretending we were fine. Lisa, 13 at the time, was serious and careful. She'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework, glancing at me with those steady, worried eyes. Once she asked, "Mom, are we going to be all right?" I told her yes, even though I didn't believe it myself. Every dollar had an assignment: rent, groceries, school supplies. I marked each bill with sticky notes so I could keep track. Some nights I'd sit at the table counting tips, sorting quarters into neat piles, whispering, "It's enough," even when it wasn't. That first winter without Robert, the heating bill nearly crushed us. I wore to sweaters and told the kids it was fun to sleep under extra blankets. When David was accepted to the University of Wisconsin, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had no idea how I would pay for it. He hugged me and said, "I'll pay you back someday, Mom." I smiled and told him not to worry. It's what mothers say, but I meant it. I wanted him to have the life we never got to live. That's when I opened a second account at the local credit union. I named it the Freedom Fund. Every week I tuck something into it. A 20 from tips, 50 from a canceled hair appointment, whatever I could spare. It wasn't just money. It was my hope that my son would never have to feel the weight I carried. Over the years, the fund grew. I used it to buy his college books, then to help when his car broke down, then to cover part of his student loans after graduation. I told myself it was love, but in hindsight, it was also fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, he'd stop calling. Fear that without my usefulness, I'd lose my place in his life. When he got his first job as a physical therapist, I was unbearably proud. I can still see his face the day I handed him the keys to the small condo I'd bought using that fund. "Mom, I can't take this," he said, but I saw the relief flicker in his eyes. "You're not taking it," I told him. "You're living in it." I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to feel me there, even in the smallest way. Now, sitting in my kitchen all these years later, I can trace how every one of those choices built the story we're standing in. Every gentle word spoken through exhaustion, every bill handled quietly, every problem solved before anyone asked. They all taught him that I would always absorb the weight, and every thank you that never came left a tiny mark on my heart. I don't blame him entirely. Children learn the lessons we show them. I taught him that my love was bottomless and boundaryless. Still remembering it now, the sting is sharp. The way he used to say, "You'll figure it out, Mom." Back then, it sounded like trust. Now, it sounds like dismissal. I used to think that sacrifices meant more when nobody noticed them. That love was supposed to be invisible. But sitting here today, I know better. Invisibility isn't noble. It's lonely. And I'm tired of being the ghost who keeps everything running while everyone else moves forward, never once looking back. Snow was falling hard that night, the kind that hushes everything and makes the world feel smaller, as if it's folding in on itself. I sat at my kitchen table with the only light coming from the lamp above me. My phone lay face down beside a pile of old bank statements, their edges worn soft from years of being thumbed through. I'd spent decades arranging my life around the needs of others. But that night, those papers felt different. They looked like evidence. Every deposit, every transfer, every payment, proof of how he'd slowly erased myself, one act of generosity at a time. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and indifferent, while my own heartbeat thudded louder with every passing second. I kept replaying David's voice on the phone, calm, careful, practiced. "It's nothing personal, Mom." The words had been chosen like a surgeon chooses instruments, gentle, precise, meant to minimize the damage. But cruelty doesn't always arrive sharp. Sometimes it comes padded, wrapped in politeness. What stayed with me most wasn't even his voice. It was Caroline's whisper in the background. "Just tell her," David said casually, like I was a chore he'd forgotten to do. I reached for a statement and highlighted a number. $18,400. The last payment I'd made toward their venue. I could still hear his voice the day he called about it. Excited, grateful. "Mom, you're the best. You're making our dream wedding happen." I smiled then, believing I was helping him build a future. Now that number stared up at me like a bruise. I could have called him that night, demanded an explanation, asked how he went from gratitude to pushing me out. But I didn't. I chose silence. Not out of weakness, out of intention. I wanted him to hear what silence sounds like when it isn't filled with devotion. Outside, the wind clawed at the windows, rattling them with bursts of snow. I thought of Robert again, how he always said storms were cleansing. They wash away the dirt. "Helen," he'd tell me, "everything looks clearer after." I closed my eyes and let that thought settle in my chest. Maybe this storm wasn't here to punish me. Maybe it was here to strip things down to the truth. I opened my laptop and logged into the account where all the wedding payments were managed. The page loaded slowly, numbers glowing in pale blue. My cursor hovered over the freeze account button, my finger trembling. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about every birthday and holiday I'd spent alone, while everyone else had somewhere better to be. I was thinking about that Christmas Eve when I stayed up baking cookies, so the kids would wake up to something sweet only for David to complain. There weren't enough chocolate chips. My chest tightened as another memory surfaced. A call from him during college. He was crying, said he couldn't make rent. I had $40 in my wallet, but I sent him to $100 and told him I'd figure out the rest. That week, I lived on instant soup. He promised, "I'll make it up to you someday, Mom." Someday never arrived. The screen blinked. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" I stared at those words for a long time. For the first time in my life, I truly was sure. I clicked yes. The room went still. The hum of the refrigerator slipped into the place Guild used to sit. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Once, then again, then again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Each vibration felt like an echo from the life I just stepped away from. By the 10th missed call, something unexpected washed over me. Relief. I had been holding my breath for years, waiting for gratitude that never came. Now, finally, I could breathe. A small laugh escaped me, surprising and thin. I hadn't heard that sound for myself in years. But then the wave hit. Sharp, aching grief. I wasn't just cutting off the money. I was admitting that the relationship I believed in might never have existed at all. I thought of that little boy who'd hold my hand crossing the street who used to say, "You're my favorite person, Mom." Where had he gone? Had he ever been real? Or was I seeing what I needed to see? I pictured him and Caroline at that very moment. Plans unraveling. The venue calling to report the frozen payment. The florist asking for another card. Panic rising in his voice. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt finished. I had been invisible for so long that even my absence would probably be blamed on someone else. Snow thickened outside, turning the street into a sheet of white. I stood up, walked to the window, and pressed my palm against the cold glass. My reflection looked back at me, faint, tired, but steadier than before. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. My phone lit up one last time. David's name glowing softly. I let it ring. I wanted him to learn what silence really sounds like. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I switched off the lamp, leaving the kitchen dark, except for the ghostly blue glow of the snow outside. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel desperate to be noticed. I just felt still. And in that stillness, in the middle of that storm, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. By morning, the calls had slowed. but they hadn't stopped. The first voicemail arrived at dawn. David's voice stretched thin with panic. "Mom, it's me. There's been a mistake with the accounts. The venue says the payment didn't go through. Can you call me back?" He sounded careful, polite in that tight, measured way people sound when they're afraid they've officially pushed someone too far. By the fourth message, the politeness was gone. "Mom, this isn't funny. They're threatening to cancel everything." Then a pause, a beat of silence, and finally, a shorter, clipped message. "Caroline's furious." Hearing her name was like being pricked by a needle. Small, sharp, impossible to ignore. She was always there, even when she wasn't speaking, woven into the spaces between his sentences, nudging, instructing, deciding. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen table, watching thick snowflakes melt against the window pane. My phone lit up again. Caroline this time. I didn't answer. I wanted to hear what her voice sounded like when she realized money didn't materialize. Simply because she wanted it badly enough. I pictured her pacing their apartment, hair immaculate, irritation tucked into every breath. "Your mother's being unreasonable," she'd say, as if I hadn't paid for half their lives already. The calls came in waves. One, then another, wham, and another, until finally the texts began. "David, Mom, please. We just need to talk." David again. "Caroline says this is ruining everything. Please fix it." I set the phone face down. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't apologize. They didn't wonder if I might be hurting. They just wanted me to patch the holes, sweep up the mess, shoulder the burden like I always had. I used to mistake that for love. Now I understood. Love without respect isn't love. It's labor. By noon, Lisa called. Her voice was gentle, uncertain. "Mom, what's going on?" "David says you froze his accounts." I breathed out slowly. I didn't freeze his accounts. I froze mine. A pause. "They're saying the wedding might have to be postponed. Then they'll have time to think," I said. "Mom," she whispered, confusion threading through her tone. "He's really upset. Everyone's saying." I cut her off softly. "Everyone's saying what they always say. Sweetheart. That I'm overreacting. Too emotional. Too much. Let them talk." Silence. Then a small sigh. "You don't sound angry," she murmured. "I'm not," I said. "Just tired." When we hung up, I stayed there for a while, staring at the stillness where my phone had been buzzing nonstop only minutes earlier. It was strange how calm a room could feel when you finally stopped answering every call. That demanded something from you. These walls had heard everything over the years. Laughter, tears, promises, excuses, apologies that never arrived. Now they held nothing but quiet. That afternoon, a relative I hadn't spoken to in months called. She wasn't checking on me. I knew that immediately. She was hungry for gossip. "Helen," she cooed, her voice too sweet to be sincere. "I just heard about the mix-up. I told David you'd never do something like that on purpose." "It wasn't a mix-up," I said evenly. "And it wasn't on purpose. It was necessary. Well, you know how weddings are. Stressful, emotional. Then it's good practice for marriage," I said, cutting her off gently. "They'll learn how to handle disappointment." A beat of stunned silence. I could almost hear her blinking. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped. "People are saying this isn't like you." "They're right," I replied and hung up. As the day unfolded, I could almost see the chaos from my quiet kitchen. The florist refusing to release the flowers without payment. The photographer pulling out the venue demanding a new deposit immediately. I imagined Caroline trying to hold the pieces together, watching her meticulously choreographed plans unravel. She had always treated me like a background extra in their story. Someone who paid, cooked, smiled, and stayed quiet. Now she was discovering what happened when the background stepped out of frame. The resentment I'd carried for years didn't burn anymore. It settled into something steadier. Sadness with a backbone. I wasn't angry at them for calling me selfish. I was angry at myself for waiting so long to stop being useful to people who only valued the usefulness. Every message, every plea that popped up that day felt like a reminder of a lifetime spent being needed, but never cherished. That night, the snow finally stopped. I stood by the window, watching the street lights shimmer against the icy road. Somewhere out there, my son was being forced to stand on his own defeat for the first time. I thought about calling him just to say I loved him. Beauty didn't. Not yet. He needed to understand that love isn't measured by how much someone gives. It's measured by how much someone appreciates what was given. I turned off the lights, letting the house slip into soft darkness. My phone was still on the table, quiet now. For the first time in years, it wasn't demanding anything from me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for letting it rest. The snow outside had finally begun to melt, leaving behind damp patches of pavement and the faintest hint of spring in the air. A week had passed since the call stopped, and my house had found its way back into a quiet, steady rhythm. I woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat by the window with my old chipped mug, the one David painted years ago with crooked blue letters that still read, "Best Mo." The paint had faded, but the words were still there. I traced them with my thumb, thinking about how something can fade and still matter more than anything else. A soft knock at the door startled me. For a moment, my heart leapt. Some small, stubborn part of me picturing David standing there, ready to apologize, ready to meet my eyes. But when I opened the door, no one stood on the porch. Only a small envelope rested on the step, my name written in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from Denise, a woman I'd worked with years ago at the diner on Highway 41. She wrote about the nights I covered her shifts when her daughter was sick, how that kindness had kept her from losing her job. "You were the only one who saw me," the letter said. "I wanted you to know I've never forgotten." I read those words again and again until they blurred. Someone had seen me. Maybe not the people I had built my life around, but someone had. It was a quiet, unexpected comfort. A reminder that kindness doesn't disappear just because the people closest to you refused to notice it. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. David's name lit up the screen. For the first time in days, I opened the message. It was long, almost pleading. He said he was sorry. He said Caroline hadn't meant to hurt me. He said they wanted to start fresh and maybe meet for lunch to talk things out. I read every line carefully. Not once did he mention love. Not once did he acknowledge the years, the sacrifices, the life I had poured into him. There was only the familiar expectation that I'd return to my old role. The fixer, the helper, the silent foundation they built their comfort on. A few hours later, Caroline posted a photo online, her perfectly manicured hand holding a coffee cup captioned, "Protect your peace from toxic people." I almost laughed. The irony was too sharp, too clean. After everything I had done, somehow I was the toxin. I set the phone face down and chose not to answer either of them. That evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The snow had turned to slush, and the air smelled like wet earth. Children splashed in puddles with sticks, their laughter ringing out as freely as birdsong. I passed the park where I used to take David and Lisa when they were little. I could almost hear their giggles, see their mittens swinging from the chains of the old metal swings. For a moment, I missed the simplicity of those days when love wasn't something to negotiate or justify. When I returned home, the house felt warm, peaceful. I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled by the window again. The sky had softened into shades of pink, laying a gentle glow over the melting snow. I thought about Robert, about the way he used to say, "You don't have to prove love, Helen. You just have to live it." For so long, I'd confused sacrifice with worth, giving with loving. But that night, for the first time, I understood the difference. I knew the calls would come again, maybe next week, maybe the month after. Someone would try to make me feel guilty for choosing silence. They always do, but I already knew my answer. I wasn't going to apologize for protecting the small, fragile peace I had finally reclaimed. I looked around my living room at the things that were still mine. The yellow curtains I'd sewn myself. The framed photo of Robert smiling on the counter. The soft tick of the clock marking another quiet hour. For years, I believed that being alone was the same as being unloved. Now I understood that sometimes solitude is the only way to remember who you are. Outside, the street shimmered with melting snow, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath. I closed my eyes, took a long, steady breath, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the silence, to the peace, to the strength it took to finally stop chasing people who never chose me back. And if someone out there has ever made you feel invisible, I want you to remember this. You are not forgotten. You are not too much. And one day when you finally choose yourself, the silence that follows won't hurt.